They say every man's home is his castle. For 7 years, I believed that. My wife and I, we weren't royalty, but we were the masters of our domain. We bought our house when I was 31 and she was 29. It was a modest 2-story place with a decent backyard and a creaky front porch. But it was ours. Every loose floorboard we fixed, every wall we painted, every leaky faucet we replaced. It was us building a life, brick by brick. We were a team. I'm Ezekiel Jackson. I'm 38 now, and for the longest time I thought our foundation was solid. But I learned that sometimes the biggest threats to your kingdom don't come from the outside. Sometimes the siege is silent, and it starts from within over something so small, so insignificant, you'd never see it coming. In my castle, the battleground was a small beige circle of plastic on the hallway wall, the thermostat. It wasn't anything fancy. It was a Honeywell round T87, the classic analog model. You've probably seen one. It's the kind of thermostat that's been in homes for generations. A simple round dial with numbers etched around the edge, and a little red needle that you'd move to set the temperature. It made a satisfying soft click when the heat or the air conditioning kicked on. It was old, probably original to the house, a relic we inherited from the previous owners. For years it was just there. A silent, functional part of our home's background noise, as unremarkable as a light switch or a doorknob. It did its job, we did ours, and life was comfortable. Life was predictable. Then things started to change. It was subtle at first, so subtle I thought I was imagining it. It began as a feeling. I'd come home from a long day at work, walk through the front door, and the air would just feel heavy, stagnant and warm, like the house had been holding its breath all day. I'd loosen my tie, drop my bag, and walk straight to the hallway. I'd look at that little beige circle. I'm a creature of habit. I like the house at a steady 72 degrees. It's the perfect temperature for me, not too hot, not too cold. I always set it to 72 before I leave for work in the morning. But on these days, I'd find the little red needle pointing to 76, sometimes 77. The first few times I chalked it up to, well, anything else. Maybe the sun was hitting that wall just right and throwing off the sensor. Maybe the old Honeywell was finally starting to show its age, getting a little finicky. I'd just sigh, turn the dial back to my preferred 72, and feel the familiar rumble as the air conditioner kicked to life. I wouldn't even mention it to my wife. Why would I? It was a non-issue, a quirk of an old house. But then it started happening in the other direction. I'd go to bed comfortable under a single sheet, the house a perfect 72 degrees. Then around 2 or 3 in the morning, I'd wake up shivering. Not just a little chilly, but that deep, bone-aching cold where your teeth start to chatter and you have to curl up into a ball to preserve any warmth. My wife, sleeping like a log, would be bundled up under the thick comforter, perfectly content. I'd slip out of bed, my feet freezing on the hardwood floor, and creep down the dark hallway. And there it was, the red needle on the Honeywell sitting at a brisk 66 degrees. Again, I'd make excuses. Maybe I'd bumped it by accident before bed. Maybe the old dial was getting loose and slipping during the night. It seemed impossible, but what was the alternative? I'd nudge it back up to 72, listen for the click of the furnace, and crawl back into bed, my mind racing. How could a dial just move on its own? It didn't make sense. But the alternative, that someone was moving, it seemed even less likely. This became my new unspoken routine. I was in a constant silent dance with this inanimate object. I'd set the temperature, and the house would conspire to change it. I'd leave for work and return to a sauna. I'd go to sleep and wake up in an icebox. The comfort of my own home, the one place in the world where I was supposed to be able to relax and feel at ease, was gone. It was replaced by a creeping anxiety. The simple act of walking through my front door was now filled with a sense of dread. What would it be this time? Too hot. Too cold. I started to feel like a stranger in my own house, my body constantly bracing for the next temperature swing. I remember one Saturday afternoon vividly. I had spent the morning doing yard work, and I came inside sweaty and tired. The first thing I did was walk to the thermostat and set it to a cool 70 degrees just to bring the temperature down a little faster. I went and took a shower, and when I came out 20 minutes later, the air was thick and humid. It felt even hotter than when I first came inside. I walked back to the thermostat, a towel around my waist, and my heart sank. The needle was pointing squarely at 78. The air conditioner hadn't even been running. The furnace had been. I had been actively heating the house on a hot afternoon. It was infuriating. It was illogical. It was starting to make me feel like I was going crazy. Was I really that forgetful? At 38, was my memory already starting to fail me? Did I really turn the dial the wrong way? I stood there, water dripping onto the floor, staring at that beige circle, and for the first time I felt a genuine sense of distrust, not in the thermostat, but in myself. The house we had bought together, this symbol of our shared life and future, was starting to feel like a hostile environment, and the source of it all was this simple, stupid dial. An object with no complex electronics, just a mercury switch and a bimetallic strip. It was the most basic technology imaginable, and it was somehow defeating me. The castle walls were closing in, and the air was getting harder and harder to breathe. I was constantly on edge, and I had no idea that this was only the beginning. The silent war over the thermostat was about to get a voice, and it wasn't going to be mine. The first time I decided to actually say something, my heart was pounding. It felt ridiculous. I'm a grown man, 38 years old, and I was nervous about asking my wife a simple question about the temperature in our own home. But after that Saturday, when I came out of the shower to find the furnace blasting on a hot afternoon, the feeling of being crazy was so overwhelming that I knew I couldn't keep it inside anymore. I waited until later that evening. We were sitting on the couch watching a movie. The air was finally comfortable again because I had gone and triple-checked the thermostat myself. I turned to her during a commercial break, trying to sound as casual as possible. "Hey, honey," I started, my voice a little tight. "Quick question, and it's a weird one. Did you happen to adjust the thermostat at all this afternoon after I came in from mowing the lawn?" She looked over at me, her expression a perfect mask of mild confusion. "The thermostat? No, why?" "Oh, no reason," I said, trying to backpedal. "It's just, when I got out of the shower, the heat was on. The dial was set to 78. She blinked, then gave a little laugh. It wasn't a mean laugh, more of a bemused, gentle chuckle. And that's what made it so effective. 78, honey, no. Why would I turn the heat on? It was boiling today. She reached over and patted my arm. "You must have turned the dial the wrong way when you came inside. You were probably overheated from being out in the sun and just weren't thinking straight." I just stared at her. The explanation was so simple, so plausible. It made perfect sense. And yet, deep in my gut, something felt wrong. I remembered so clearly turning the dial counterclockwise, watching the little red needle move past 72 and land squarely on 70. But her confidence was absolute. She wasn't defensive. She wasn't angry. She was just stating a simple fact, and the fact was that I had made a mistake. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Yeah, you're probably right. I must have just been out of it." She smiled, that warm, reassuring smile that had made me fall in love with her in the first place. "Don't worry about it. You've been working so hard lately. Your mind is probably just a little fried." And just like that, the conversation was over. She turned back to the movie, completely untroubled. But I wasn't watching anymore. I was replaying the moment in my head over and over again. Did I turn it the wrong way? It seemed impossible. But she was so certain. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was just fried. That single conversation marked the beginning of the next 8 weeks of my life. It was the moment the silent war gained a voice, and that voice started telling me I was the problem. From that day on, a pattern emerged. It was a subtle, maddening cycle of events. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my breath misting in the air, feeling like I was sleeping in a meat locker. I'd slip out of bed, the floorboards like ice under my bare feet, and find the thermostat set to 65. The next morning, over coffee, I'd try to bring it up. "Man, it was freezing in here last night," I'd say. "Did you get cold and turn the heat down by mistake?" And the answer was always the same, delivered with that same gentle, concerned tone. No, I slept great. I was perfectly cozy. Are you feeling okay? Maybe you're coming down with something. So now, not only was I forgetful, but I was also possibly getting sick. My own physical sensations were being called into question. I wasn't cold, I was ill. Then the opposite would happen. I'd set the air conditioning to a reasonable 72 before leaving for work. I'd come home after a long day looking forward to that cool blast of air when I opened the door. Instead, I'd walk into a wall of heat. The house would be a stuffy, humid 79 degrees. The AC unit outside would be silent. I'd check the dial and sure enough it had been moved. That evening I'd try again. Was it chilly in here today? I noticed the AC was off when I got home. And my wife, who worked from home, would look up from her laptop with a puzzled expression. Really, it felt fine to me. I was comfortable all day. I didn't even notice. She didn't notice. That was the phrase that started to eat at me. How could you not notice a 7-degree temperature change? How could you not notice the house becoming an oven? It was another layer of dismissal. My discomfort wasn't just wrong, it was irrelevant. It wasn't even on her radar. The gaslighting was masterful because it was never aggressive. It was always wrapped in the language of care and concern. When I started getting visibly frustrated, she'd pivot. "Honey, you're getting so worked up over this," she'd say, her voice soft and soothing. "It's just a thermostat. It's an old house. These things happen. Why are you letting it stress you out so much?" She was turning my frustration into an overreaction. The problem wasn't the constantly changing temperature or her denial of it. The problem was my reaction to it. I was the one being too sensitive. I was the one making a big deal out of nothing. I started to feel a profound sense of isolation. Who could I possibly talk to about this? If I told my friends, "My wife keeps changing the thermostat and then says she didn't," they'd laugh. They'd say, "Welcome to marriage." They wouldn't understand the psychological weight of it. They wouldn't understand that it wasn't about being hot or cold. It was about being told day after day that your reality is not real. After about a month of this, I thought I had a brilliant idea. A way to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. I started taking pictures. Every time I set the thermostat, I'd pull out my phone frame, the old Honeywell dial perfectly, and take a time-stamped photo. 72 degrees, 8:05 a.m., 68 degrees, 10:30 p.m. It felt insane having to create a dossier of evidence just to feel sane in my own home, but it was my anchor to reality. The first time I tried to use my proof, it backfired spectacularly. I came home to another sweltering house. I walked straight to the thermostat, saw it was set to 80, and my blood boiled. I didn't say anything at first. I waited until we were eating dinner. "It was really hot in the house when I got home again," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Oh," she said, not looking up from her plate. I didn't notice. "Well, it was," I said, my voice getting a little firmer. "It was set to 80. But I know for a fact I set it to 72 this morning." She finally looked at me, a flicker of something in her eyes. Annoyance, pity. "Are you sure about that?" she asked. "You were in a huge rush this morning. You probably just forgot." This was it. My moment of vindication. I pulled out my phone and slid it across the table. "I'm positive," I said, because I took a picture. She picked up the phone and looked at the image of the thermostat dial, the needle, pointing precisely at 72. The timestamp was clearly visible. For a split second, I felt a wave of relief. Finally, here was the proof. She couldn't deny it now. She put the phone down and looked at me, and her expression wasn't one of guilt or surprise. It was one of deep, profound concern. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice dripping with sympathy. "You're taking pictures of the thermostat now. Is everything all right at work? You seem so anxious lately." She shook her head sadly. "You know, I did a little tidying up in the hallway this afternoon. I was dusting. I bet I bumped the dial with the vacuum cleaner handle." That must be it. I was speechless. She had done it again. In the span of 30 seconds, she had completely dismissed my evidence, reframed my attempt to validate my own reality as a symptom of anxiety, and provided a perfectly plausible, completely unverifiable explanation for the change. She had turned my proof into a weapon against me. I wasn't a rational person trying to solve a problem. I was an anxious man obsessing over trivial things. I just stared at her. The vacuum cleaner handle. It was brilliant. How could I possibly argue with that? If I said, "No, you didn't," I would sound like a paranoid accuser. If I accepted it, I was accepting that my grand piece of evidence was meaningless. She had me completely trapped. "Yeah," I mumbled, picking my phone back up. "The vacuum. That must have been it. I didn't take any more pictures after that. What was the point?" Any proof I gathered would just be twisted into more evidence of my own supposed instability. I retreated back into silence. The dance continued, but I stopped trying to talk about it. I'd just quietly adjust the temperature back to where I wanted it, feeling a fresh wave of resentment and helplessness each time. I felt like a ghost in my own home, my only job to correct a problem that officially didn't exist. My wife was always comfortable. She was always sleeping soundly or working peacefully or relaxing on the couch, perfectly content in the freezing cold or the suffocating heat she had secretly created. Her comfort came at the expense of mine, and even worse, at the expense of my sanity. The house we'd bought together 7 years earlier, the place that was supposed to be our sanctuary, now felt like a psychological battlefield, and I was losing. The enemy wasn't just the person sleeping next to me. It was the voice she had planted in my head, the voice that whispered, "Maybe she's right. Maybe you are just forgetful. Maybe you are just sensitive. Maybe you are the one who's crazy." It was a slow, creeping poison, and with every turn of that little beige dial, it was seeping deeper into my soul. I was being erased 1 degree at a time. The weeks that followed the vacuum cleaner incident were the worst. The game, now that I had shown my hand and lost so spectacularly, escalated. Before, the changes were subtle, a few degrees here and there. Now they were blatant, almost mocking. I would leave the house with the air conditioning set to a comfortable 72, only to come home to a humid, oppressive 85. I'd wake up in the middle of the night shivering, my breath fogging in the air, to find the heat had been turned off and the AC was blasting at 65 degrees. It became a constant, exhausting battle fought in silence. I'd come home, feel the wall of heat, and walk straight to the thermostat to correct it. She wouldn't even acknowledge it. She'd be sitting on the couch reading a book, a faint sheen of sweat on her brow, and act as if nothing was wrong. If I came home to an icebox, she'd be wrapped in her thickest robe, sipping hot tea, a picture of cozy contentment. She was conditioning the house for her comfort and conditioning me to accept that my own comfort and my own perception of reality didn't matter. My anxiety, the very thing she had accused me of, became a self-fulfilling prophecy. I found myself obsessively checking the thermostat before I left a room. I'd walk out the door to go to work and have to double back just to make sure I hadn't imagined setting it correctly. The voice she had planted in my head was thriving. "Maybe you did forget. Maybe you're just making a big deal out of nothing." I was 38 years old, and I felt like I was losing my mind over a little plastic dial on the wall. The breaking point, the moment the fog of self-doubt cleared and was replaced by cold, hard certainty, came about a week ago. It was a Saturday afternoon. I had just set the thermostat to 70 degrees. I remember the number exactly. I made a point to stare at it, to burn the image of the needle on that number into my memory. My wife was in the living room watching TV. I went out to the attached garage to grab a screwdriver from my toolbox. I couldn't have been gone for more than 90 seconds. When I walked back into the hallway, a blast of cold air hit me. A primal sense of dread washed over me. I looked at the thermostat. The needle was now pointing to 60 degrees. In the 90 seconds, I was in the garage. I walked into the living room, screwdriver still in my hand. "Did you just turn the air conditioning down?" I asked. My voice was dangerously calm. She glanced up from the TV, her expression one of mild confusion. "No," she said, and turned back to her show. "Don't lie to me." I said the words, feeling ripped from my throat. I was gone for a minute and a half. I set it to 70, and now it's on 60. There's no one else here. You were sitting 10 feet away from it. Did you change the thermostat? She muted the TV and turned to face me fully. Her face was a perfect mask of wounded innocence. Ezekiel, what is wrong with you? She said, her voice soft and laced with that same infuriating pity. I was watching my show. I haven't moved. Why are you so obsessed with this? It's just a thermostat. It was the lie. The absolute bald-faced, impossible lie. It wasn't about the temperature anymore. It wasn't about comfort. It was about her standing there, looking me dead in the eye and telling me that something I had just experienced with my own senses did not happen. The vacuum cleaner handle was plausible deniability. This was just a denial of reality itself. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The fight was over, not because I'd lost, but because I finally understood I couldn't win by playing her game. The problem wasn't my memory or my anxiety. The problem was an analog dial that anyone could touch. The solution wasn't to argue. The solution was to upgrade the technology. I didn't say another word. I just turned around, went back to the garage, and put the screwdriver away. I spent the rest of the weekend being quiet and agreeable. On Monday, 6 days ago during my lunch break, I went online and bought the Hevelin Home Hub, Model 3. It promised total control remote access, and most importantly, administrative passwords. It was the perfect weapon. It arrived 2 days later. I waited until this morning. She had a yoga class and then was meeting friends for lunch. I knew I'd have the house to myself for at least 4 hours. The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, I went to the breaker box and cut the power to the HVAC system. My heart was pounding, not with anger, but with a kind of thrilling purpose. I went to the hallway with my toolkit. I looked at that old beige Honeywell round T87 one last time. For 7 years, that simple device had been a neutral object in our home. For the last 8 weeks, it had been her primary tool of psychological warfare. With a Phillips head screwdriver, I carefully removed it from the wall. It felt momentous, like I was decommissioning a weapon. The wires hung out of the wall, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of possibility. The installation of the Hevelin Home Hub, Model 3, was surprisingly easy. I followed the instructions, connected the color-coded wires, and mounted the sleek black digital interface to the wall. It looked like something from the future compared to the old relic it replaced. I flipped the breaker back on. The screen lit up, glowing with a soft white light. I downloaded the app to my phone and began the setup process. I connected it to our Wi-Fi. I calibrated the temperature sensors. And then I came to the final, most important step, administrator setup. I entered my email, and then it asked me to create a password. I typed in a long, complex password, something only I would ever know. I saved it. The app confirmed, setup complete. You are the administrator. That was it. That was time zero. I held the power to control my home's climate in the palm of my hand. I set the temperature to a perfect 71 degrees and enabled the admin lock. No one could change the settings from the wall unit itself. Any adjustments had to be made through the app on my phone, protected by my password. The war was over. I had won. My wife came home around 3 o'clock. I was in my home office working. I heard her come in, drop her keys in the bowl by the door, and walk down the hall. Then silence. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps coming towards my office. She appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed. "What is that thing on the wall?" she asked. There was no pleasantry, just a sharp edge to her voice. "Oh, the thermostat," I said, leaning back in my chair, keeping my tone light. "The old one was acting up, so I upgraded it. It's a smart thermostat." "Acting up, it was working fine," she said, her eyes narrowing. "I tried to turn the air up a little, and it wouldn't do anything. The screen is locked." "That's right," I said calmly. "It's all controlled by an app now. It's much more efficient. It learns our patterns to save energy." She stared at me, the pieces clearly clicking into place in her mind. The game was up, and she knew it. "So how do I change it?" she demanded. "You don't," I said, my voice perfectly even. "I control it from my phone. If you're feeling too cold or too hot, just let me know and I can adjust it for you." The look on her face was a mixture of shock and pure, undiluted rage. Her weapon was gone. Her ability to silently manipulate my environment, and by extension my mind, had been neutralized by a piece of technology she couldn't bypass. She couldn't sneak to the wall in the middle of the night. She couldn't accidentally bump it with a vacuum cleaner. The deniability was gone. The power was gone. She was speechless. For the first time in months, she had no plausible explanation, no psychological angle to play, no way to twist the situation back on me. There was only the quiet, immutable truth of a password-protected system. She stood there for a long moment, her mouth slightly open, and then she just turned and walked away without another word. It's been peaceful all evening. The house has remained at a steady, comfortable 71 degrees. There are no drafts, no hot spots. For the first time in what feels like an eternity, I'm not on edge. I'm not second-guessing the feeling on my own skin. I don't have to brace myself for a silent battle every time I walk through my own home. My wife, my 36-year-old wife, has been quiet and sullen, but the oppressive tension that used to fill the house is gone. It's been replaced by a simple, comfortable quiet. I know this little black box on the wall hasn't solved the deeper issues in my marriage, but it did solve the immediate problem. It ended the gaslighting. It proved that I wasn't crazy forgetful or overly anxious. I was just a man who was being systematically manipulated 1 degree at a time. And tonight, for the first time in a long time in the sanctuary I bought 7 years ago, I can finally breathe. I have my peace of mind back, and it's all thanks to a simple password.